Begin the Gemara today at the bottom of Chav Ches Amud Beis, where it says V'Rabbi Yishmael. The Gemara here is going to explain a brayso that was quoted to explain the psukim that it says by Sotah. It says 3 times nitma, v'nitma, and im nitma. Why is the Torah saying that this woman is tamei 3 times? So the brayso brought that Rabbi Akiva says once is saying that she's asa to the husband. Second time is saying that she's asa to this man, the suspected man, the boil. And the third time is saying that she's asa to eat truma. Okay, so now Rabbi Shmuel says on that. Rabbi Shmuel argues with Rabbi Akiva, and he brings a kal v'chaimer to teach us that this Sotah will be asa to marry a kain. Meaning, even if her husband passes away, so now she should be free to go and marry a kain. But because she's a Sotah before, so now from time she becomes a Sotah, she's not allowed to go marry a kain. And he brings a kal v'chaimer for that. So the Gemara will address over here this argument between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. It's not clear exactly what Rabbi Shmuel was arguing with Rabbi Akiva, as the Gemara asks. Let's see. Fragt the Gemara, Rabbi Yishmael, what's Rabbi Shmuel saying? Oh, Rabbi Akiva Terume. Rabbi Akiva says that you have 3 psukim, one for the Baal, one for the Baal, and the third is regarding eating Terume. Umahadele ihu. What is Rabbi Shmuel answering to Rabbi Akiva? I don't need a pasuk for that, but he brings up a 4th point, kohona. He talks about the fact that this Sotah becomes asa to a kain. So the conversation here is strange. He's talking about one thing and he's responding something else. Who says there's even an argument here? Maybe Rabbi Akiva agrees to what Rabbi Shmuel says regarding kohona. Additionally, the question is, Rabbi Akiva kohona minale. According to Rabbi Akiva, this point that Rabbi Shmuel says that a Sotah will always be asa to marry a kain, from where does he know this? Rabbi Akiva doesn't bring any source for this. If you'll argue and say regarding the fact that a Sotah is also to marry a kain, for that you don't need a pasuk, you don't even need a kal v'chaimer, you need no source. Why? Because we see regarding a Sotah, even though a Sotah is only a suffix zaina, we don't know if she actually had a relation with this man, but nevertheless the Torah comes and says that she's tamei. And we consider her to be like a woman that for sure had a relation with this man. So if she's a mamish like a zaina, so the halacha is that in such a case, she can't marry a kain. Rashi here brings a source from the pasuk. It says, Kisiya le'ish zar. That, actually the pasuk of Kisiya le'ish zar is talking about truma. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. But the halacha that a zaina is not allowed to marry a kain, that's halacha that it says all over. A woman that was mizana with somebody, the truth is that whether it's beratzin, or even ba'ainis, such a woman may not ever marry a kain. That's one of the women that may not marry a kain, a zaina. A grusha, a zaina is one of them. So over here, if the pasuk says that a Sotah is like a zaina, so then she can't marry a kain. Why do we need a pasuk for that? Says the Gemara, but if that's the basis of Rabbi Akiva's opinion, if so, Terume, nami loyti vayikra. The fact that she can't eat truma, this woman that's a Sotah, if she's a bas kain or she was married to a kain, she can't eat truma. For that, you should also not need a pasuk. Share also bas suffix zaina kazaina, because since the Sotah, even though it's only a suffix, the Torah considers her to be like a vadai zaina, she shouldn't be able to eat truma. And for this, Rashi here brings the pasuk, because regarding truma it says kisiya le'ish zar, that if she's with a strange man, with another man, so then she can't go to eat truma. And Rashi says that means not only if she gets married to someone that's possible for her to be married to, but even if she just has a relation with someone that's possible for her, she also cannot go ahead and eat truma. So over here, this woman, she's an Eishes Ish, and she went with someone else, and the Torah considers it as if it's a vadai that she had a relation with this man. She can't eat truma. So what do we need a pasuk for this? But nevertheless, for whatever reason, we see over here that Rabbi Akiva requires a pasuk for truma. So if he requires a pasuk to say that she may not eat truma, he should also require a pasuk to teach us that this zaina, this Sotah that is asa to marry a kain. So what's the source of Rabbi Akiva? So the Gemara now explains the brayso and the machlokes of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. So ella rather li Rabbi Akiva ba kroi ksivi. Truth is that according to Rabbi Akiva, there are 4 different psukim here. How are there 4 psukim? So Rashi explains because it says twice nitma and im nitma, and so that's 2 psukim, and those 2 times it says without a vav, and then the 3rd time when it says in the Torah that she's tamei, it says vinitma with a vav. And Rabbi Akiva's rule is we don't only darshan the word, we darshan the vav as well. So for the 3rd time it says with a vav, so that's another 2 times. So we have 4 different expressions in the Torah that are saying an Isser on this woman. Chad lebal, one is to say she's also to her husband. V'chad lebayil, one is to say she's also to this suspected man. V'chad lekohuna, and the third is to say that she may not marry a kohen, and that's even if her husband passes away. She can't ever in the future go and marry a kohen. And v'chad letruma, and the fourth is to say that she will be also to eat truma. So according to Rabbi Akiva, the darshans above, he has 4 different sources for all these 4 halachas. But for Rabbi Shmuel does not darshan the vav. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, plus a kroik sivi. So therefore we only have 3 sources, 3 psukim. Chad lebal, one that she's also to the baal, chad lebayil, one for the bayil, chad letruma, and one that she may not eat truma. And on that, Rabbi Shmuel says, kohone, the 4th halacha that she becomes also to the kayin, I don't need a pasuk for that. Asi b'kav v'chaymer, that Rabbi Shmuel brings with a kav v'chaymer. That's the pshat in the Braisa. So now the Gemara asks on this, on Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. Rabbi Shmuel, now according to Rabbi Shmuel, mimai ditz tirich kral letruma. How does he know to say that that 3rd pasuk is coming to teach me that this woman may not eat truma? And then he says, and then it'll be possible to have a kavachaymer to teach us that she's also to marry a kayin. That was the basis of the kavachaymer. Once we know she can't eat truma, that becomes the basis of the kavachaymer, as the Braisa explains, that she becomes also to the kayin as well. But how do you know that that's how you learn the pasuk? Maybe you should say, Dilme, maybe ki itzterech lekohona. Maybe the 3rd drasha of the pasuk is coming to teach us the opposite. It's coming to teach us that she may not marry a kayin. And then, for truma, you're not going to have any kavachayme, or truma sharia. And then for her, for this Sotah to eat truma, maybe that would be allowed. If, according to Rabbi Shmuel, there's only 3 drashas, so maybe the 3rd drasha goes on the fact that she's also to a kayin. But so for truma, that remains mutter, because they don't have a 4th drasha, according to Rabbi Shmuel. Answers the Gemara, Amalach, Rabbi Shmuel will tell you, Mistavre, it's logical to say, Dumye, the Baal, Ubayil. The 3rd drasha of the word nitma is similar to the other 2 drashas when we learn out that nitma means that she's aser, to be with her husband or with the Bayil. And therefore it's mistavre that the 3rd drasha is similar. In what sense? The Gemara explains, Ma Baal Ubayil mechayim, just like the drasha of the Isser that we're saying regarding this woman for her husband or the Bayil, that's while she's still alive, that she may not live with her husband, she may not ever get married to this bayil. So af truma, so too the 3rd drasha goes on truma, which is nami mechayim. What's the issa of truma? That when she's alive, she may not eat truma. So now all 3 drashas are the same. It's the same kind of word nitma, and they're all this similar that we're learning out that when she's alive, she becomes asit to eat truma. Lafuke kohona, but we do not learn out from the 3rd drasha kohona that she's asit to marry a kayin, the lachamisa, because that issa only applies after her husband passes away. If her husband is still alive, then she's not marrying a kain. She's married to her husband. Or even if her husband divorces her. If her husband divorces her, so then she's anyways also to marry a kain because she's a grusha. This whole halacha regarding kahuna would only apply if her husband passes away. And she's an almana. And she's allowed to marry any kain. And for that, you would need a drasha to say that because she's a Sotah, she can't marry a kain. So for that, it's achamisa. So it's not similar to the other 2 drashas. And therefore, we don't put the 3rd drasha on this halacha of kahuna. Rabbi Akiva that argues with what Rabbi Shmuel here says. Dumye, the Baal, Ubayil, Lesle. This idea that the 3rd drasha should be going dafka on Truma, so it should be similar to the drasha of Baal and Bayil, he doesn't hold of this. You don't have to have the 3rd drasha dafka to be similar. It's not necessary. The 3rd drasha could be talking about this, that she's also to marry a kain. So therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, you won't have all 4 halachas learned out of here. You can't learn out the kal v'chaymer the way Rabbi Shmuel said, because maybe the 3rd drasha does go on achamisa regarding the issa to kahuna. He doesn't find any need to say that all these 3 drashas should be similar. There's nothing forcing us to say that. Okay, and a chanami, true, according to Rabbi Akiva, you have 4 psukim, but the Gemara is trying to understand why, taka, according to Rabbi Akiva, would you need 4 psukim? Why wouldn't he agree to Rabbi Shmuel that you can learn it out from 3 psukim? Because he doesn't hold to this logic here, that the 3rd pasuk has to go dafka on truma. Or another thing the Gemara says, and this is a rule that's brought in many places, v'i nami islay, even if you would agree to Rabbi Shmuel, that the drasha is the way Rabbi Shmuel said it, and if so, you really only do need 3 psukim, and the halacha of kohuna could be learned from a kav v'chaymer, but nevertheless, milsa, the asya, b'kav v'chaymer, a matter which could be learned from a kav v'chaymer, tarach v'kasav lakra. Sometimes the Torah goes and writes that halacha anyways, even though you can learn it from a Kal V'chomer, but the Torah specified it clearly. So here as well, could be Rabbi Akiva agrees to Rabbi Shmuel, the Kal V'chomer that he taught that to teach us that this woman is Sotah Kayin. But nevertheless, Rabbi Shmuel has Rabbi Akiva that is, has an extra vav, and he learns it out from the pasuk. The Torah wrote a halacha that could have been learned from a Kal V'chomer. This is a rule that the Gemara brings up sometimes. Most of the time, something that's learned from a Kal V'chomer is not written in the pasuk, but sometimes Tarach v'Kasav L'Kra, the Torah writes it beferish. Now the Gemara comes back to the second part of the Braisa that discussed the halacha of Tumah b'chlal, a suffix Tumah. And the Gemara said that from Sotah, the fact that the Torah takes a suffix of Tumah by a Sotah and turns her into a Vadai Tumah, that she's totally also to her husband and to the Bayal and so on, from there we learn out a similar rule regarding suffix Tumah in other cases. And if you remember, the Braisa there said that there's two details. Number one, that just like the Sotah, this suffix of the Sotah happens in a private place, in a Reshus HaYachid, so too the Chumrah of suffix Tumah, that it's considered to be Vadai Tumah, is only in a Reshus HaYachid. The second rule the Braisa said is, just like by a Sotah, we're talking about people, a human being, which has das. You can talk to her and ask her what happened. So too the halacha that suffix tumah becomes like a vadai tumah is in a situation where the tumah is with a person involved. There's a person that was there in this place, and you can ask him about this. Das lishol, you can ask him about it. So here the Gemara is going to bring another source to the second detail. Omer Rav Gidl Omer Rav. Rav Gidl said in the name of Rav, this detail, this rule that the Braisa brought, that when it comes to a suffix tumah, there's a difference. If the person has das, it's talking about a person that you can ask him, or it's talking about a suffix tumah to an object, and there's no das over here that you can ask what happened. So this distinction, mehaikra nafka, you learn it out here from the following pasuk. You don't have to learn it out from Sotah, but you learn it out from this pasuk, a pasuk that it says by a korban shlomim. The pasuk says, if the basar of the shlamim will touch something that's tamei, it became tamei, lo yoichal. You should not. So then you should not eat that. Once the kachim becomes tamei, you can't eat it. What is the indication of this part of the pasuk? That vadai tamei hudu lo yoichal. If this basar becomes tamei, definitely, so then you shouldn't eat it. Lo yoichal. Ha suffix tamei. But if it's basar of the kachim, that there's only a suffix if it became tamei or not, and the suffix tar could be did not become tamei, so then then you could eat it. That's the first part of the pasuk. But hey, Meseife, what does it say in the end of the very same pasuk, which seems to be extra? I mean, the pasuk is saying that if it's tamei, do not eat it. And the pasuk goes on to say, "V'ha basar kol tar yochel basar." And now this basar, if the person is tar, then he eats the basar. Okay, so over here it's actually not mamash a repetition, because over here the pasuk is speaking about the person. Pasuk over here is saying, if the person is tired, then he should eat this basar. Now, but what is it mashma from this part of the pasuk? When it speaks about the person, it doesn't say that if the person is tamei, then you should not eat the basar, similar to what it says in the first part of the pasuk. Rather, here the pasuk says, if the person is tahir, then you could eat. So what do we understand from this? Here you can understand the exact opposite. Vadai tahir, if the person could confirm for sure that he is tahir, hu diyechal basar, then he could eat the basar of the kachim. Ha suffix tamei v'suffix tahir, but if the person has a suffix, whether he's tamei or tahir, lo yechal, then he should not eat. So when it comes to the basar being tamei, here the pasuk says, if it's tamei, don't eat it. So it's mashma, if you don't know for sure it's tamei, you could eat it. When it comes to the person, it says, if you know for sure you're tahir, then you can eat it. But if it's a suffix, then you should not eat it. So why is there a difference in this rule? So from this we learn out, so from here we understand, in the second part of the pasuk, we're talking about a suffix tumah regarding the person. So he's a person that has das. So over here, the halacha is that if there's das, a suffix tumah becomes like a vadai tumah. And therefore, not until you confirm for sure that you're tar could you eat it. And in the first part of the pasuk, it's talking about a suffix about the basar itself. Whether the basar itself was tamei. The basar itself, there's no das. And therefore, over here, the halacha is that if there's a suffix tumah on it, it won't be tamei. So we see this halacha from this pasuk here. So now the Gemara says, if so, why do we need what the Braisa said? The Braisa says we learn out this rule from the Sotah. This distinction, whether the thing that became tamei has das or not, we learn out from the Sotah. So here we're learning it out from the pasuk that it says by a korban shlomim. Says the Gemara ve'itzterech, and I need both sources. Again, I need this source over here that we brought from this pasuk that Rav said, and also and I also need the source from what it said by Sotah. If I'd only have the source over here of this pasuk that Rav brought, I would say that this distinction is bein b'reshus hayachid or bein b'reshus harabim. It makes no difference if it's in reshus hayachid or reshus harabim. There's no remez, there's no source for this distinction of reshus hayachid or reshus harabim. It just talks about the difference between the basar and the human being. So therefore, itzrech lemigmar misayte. So we learn out from Sotah that over there, the tumah, that's a suffix that becomes like a vadai, is only in a private place. It's only in a reshus hayachid. So that's the detail that we learn from Sotah. On the other hand, v'i mei Sotah, if I would learn out this halacha only from Sotah, so then hava mineh, I would think to say that there's another detail you should learn out from Sotah. This idea that we're machmer, that a suffix becomes like a vadai, is only if there's the das. Not only is the one that becomes tameh a human being, but the one that causes the tameh is also a human being. Like the story with the Sotah. It's the Isha and the Baal are both people that have das. So maybe only then, when both the what's the lashon of the Gemara again, noigeya and the magia, the one that was touched and the one that touched, the one that causes a tumah, both of them have das. Only then do I say that there's a suffix that becomes like a vadai tumah. So therefore, I learn out over here from this pasuk that it says by shlamim, where the distinction of das is regarding the one that became tameh, whether it's the basar that becomes tameh or the person that becomes tameh. But there's no difference in the cause of the tameh. There's no difference if the cause of the tameh does or does not have das. So that's why we need both of these sources to give me all the details of this halacha. Going back to the Mishnah. Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek brought boy bayayim darash Rabbi Akiva v'chol kli cheres cholu. So what did the Mishnah say? Rabbi Akiva darshan from the pasuk. So the full pasuk again was that v'chol kli cheres. You have a kli cheres, so let's say it's like an earthenware oven. Ashiyipol memel toichai kol asher b'toichai yitma. So you have a sheretz that fell into the airspace of this oven. What happens? The oven becomes a rishon l'tumah. Then, if there's bread inside the oven becomes a sheni l'tomeh. And Rabbi Akiva says, the pasuk doesn't just say that the bread is tameh, the pasuk says that the bread is yitma. Yitma is mashma, also yitame. It's metame something else. So that bread, which is a sheni, could now become a shlishi l'tomeh. So Rabbi Akiva is basically saying that this halacha of shlishi l'tomeh is by any bread. By chulin bread, not only by truma or kachim, even by chulin. As we'll see here in the Gemara, the rule is that when it comes to the levels of truma, how far it goes, so truma has a higher status than chulin, and then kachim goes a step further than truma. But Rabbi Akiva says, shlishi l'tumah, that tumah can be transmitted 3 times, that's even by chulin. And we learn it out over here from this pasuk when it says regarding the bread, which is a sheni l'tumah, and it says yitma, that it could cause something else to become tameh, shlishi l'tumah. And that the Mishnah brought that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did not hold to this drasha. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai held that the sheni could cause a shlishi l'tumah only by truma, not by chulin. And by truma itself, he doesn't learn it from a pasuk, he learns it from a kal v'chomer. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in his lifetime said that he's concerned that in future generations they're going to refute his kal v'chomer, and therefore then they're going to be matir even by truma, the shlishi l'tumah. So the Gemara is going to focus here now on the source of this shlishi l'tumah by truma. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, it's only by truma. What was the kal v'chomer that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said? And what was the reason that he was concerned that in future generations people are not going to accept this kal v'chomer? Sagt the Gemara, if according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, there's no source in a pasuk like Rabbi Akiva says for the idea of shlishi l'tumah, that is solama tameh. So why does he say that even though by chulin there is no shlishi l'tumah, but by truma there is? What's his source? Amar Rav Yudah Amar Rav min Torah doesn't have a pasuk in the Torah, but midin kal v'chomer yeshle. But nevertheless, he has the following kal v'chomer. When it comes to a tful yom is a person that became tameh, and he has to go to the mikveh. And what happens when he goes to the mikveh? So as soon as he comes out of the mikveh, he's called a tful yom. Tful yom is until sundown. Now in that time period when he's a tful yom, he is partially tired already. He's allowed to eat chulin. He's allowed to touch chulin. If he touches chulin, he's not matama the chulin. He can eat the chulin. But in that time period, he may not eat truma yet. and if he touches truma, he's going to make the truma tummy. Okay, so that's the status of the Tful Yom. So Shemut b'chulin, this Tful Yom, he's allowed to eat or touch chulin, and paisel b'truma, but yet at the same time, he's not allowed to eat truma, and if he touches the truma, he'll make a tummy. For this whole sugi, you have to remember one point, that when the Gemara uses the term paisel is an expression the Gemara uses when it wants to say that you make this object tummy, but this object now cannot transmit any tumah further. When it uses the term mitame means that you make an object tameh, and that object could now transmit more tumah to the next to something else that it touches. Paisel means that this becomes tameh, but not any further. Okay, so this Tful Yom here, he's mutter b'chulin, but he's not allowed to eat truma. He's not allowed to touch truma. So we have a certain leniency when it comes to chulin, but yet regarding truma, there's a stringency that he's mitame the truma. So if so, kikar sheni, a kikar that's a sheni l'truma, that is, again, a kikar which is a sheni l'truma, shapasel b'chulin. This kikar which is a sheni, he is tameh even regarding chulin. And that's the pasuk that even Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai will agree to. It says the bread that's inside the oven becomes tameh, and that bread is a sheni l'tumah. The oven is a rishon l'tumah, and the bread is a sheni l'tumah. So if when it comes to food, to a piece of bread, which is a sheni l'tumah, and regarding chulin, it's more stringent than the Tful Yom. It's pasul. And yedin sheyasa shlishi b'truma. So most definitely we should apply this stringency by this bread, that it should have the power to passel truma to become a shlishi. Okay, because if by the Tful Yom, which has a leniency regarding chulin that it's mutter, nevertheless it has a stringency for truma that it's paisel b'truma. So the bread, which even regarding chulin, it's more stringent. By the chulin, it's a pasul. So for sure it should cause a shlishi l'tumah for truma. Now Rashi asks a question on this Gemara, and soon we'll see the Gemara asks this question basically similar regarding the next point the Gemara will bring up, that how can we make such a kind of kavachaymer? You're learning out a din that doesn't even exist in the source of the kavachaymer. Regarding the Tful Yom, when we say that it passes betruma, I don't see over there this concept that it makes a shlishi letruma. The Tful Yom, if he touches this bread, he makes the bread tameh. But we don't see the concept of shlishi letruma by the Tful Yom. So you're learning out a halacha with a kavul chaymer from Tful Yom, but you don't see over there this concept. This is what's known as daya. You have a kavul chaymer that you're learning out from Tful Yom, but because it is kavul chaymer, you're extrapolating, you're learning out for the halacha regarding the kikar, which is a sheni, more than the source of the kavul chaymer itself. How could you learn out a halacha even more than the source? So Rashi over here brings a concept that you find in other places in the Gemara, that sometimes you use the logic of the kavul chaymer, you learn out with it more than even the source itself has. And the reason is because the kavul chaymer, on one hand, is a logical thing, that we see a leniency in one place, and nevertheless it's stringent there. For sure, in a more stringent area, you have to apply that stringency. That's the logic of kavul chaymer. But nevertheless, a kavul chaymer is really a halacha l'Moshe misinai, that you have to compare in a certain way. You compare A to B, when you find the leniency by B, and then by A, you don't have that leniency, you have to take the stringency from there and learn out from here a new stringency, a new chumrah. That new chumrah is not even found in the source, but nevertheless, this is the halacha l'Moshe misinai, that the kavul chaymer teaches me this. So Rashi here says, the concept is that if the kavul chaymer will be meaningless without applying this new stringency, then you have to apply this new stringency. That's what the kavul chaymer teaches. So over here, this kavul chaymer is teaching me this new stringency, that this kikar sheni, because it's already possible chulin, so for sure we have to apply this new halacha that it will be a shlishi for truma. Okay, the Gemara asks on this kavul chaymer, ikla mifrach, I can refute this kavul chaymer. You can't learn out this kikar, this bread. You want to learn out regarding this piece of bread that it could become a shlishi for truma. You're learning it out from Tful Yom. You can't learn out from Tful Yom. Tful Yom has a unique stringency that we do not have by this kikar. What is that? You know why by Tful Yom I find this special stringency regarding truma is because Tful Yom has another stringency, and that is shekain avatoma. This person, or it could be talking not only about a person, it could be talking about a keli that became tumah, and you have to table it. There's a unique stringency of avatome. What does it mean, avatome? This person, he became tumah as an avatome. What's an avatome? A person that touches a mace is an avatome. A person that's a zav, a mitzayre, he's an avatome. And then he goes to the mikveh. And now he's a Tful Yaim. So this Tful Yaim may be an individual that's on a very high level of Tumah, an Ava Tumah. So the fact that I find by Tful Yaim that he can cause this Tumah for Trumah, that there's a stringency regarding Trumah, that's maybe because this Tful Yaim, he's an Ava Tumah, or he was an Ava Tumah. But over here, you're talking about this kikar sheni. We're not talking about a kikar that's an avatum. We're talking about a kikar that's inside this oven that became tummy from the oven, which is a rishul tumah. So over here, that stringency doesn't apply. So how could you learn out from Tful Yaim that it should be metame, truma, to make a shlishi tumah? Where are you learning it out from? From Tful Yaim. Tful Yaim has a unique stringency that it's avatumah. Says the Gemara, you're right. So teisi mitful yaim the sheretz. So let's learn this halacha out from a specific tful yaim. Which tful yaim? The tful yaim of a sheretz. What's the halacha of a tful yaim of a sheretz? So by the tful yaim of a sheretz, there is no avatumah. The person that touches a sheretz does not become avatumah. What does he become? He becomes a rishon l'tumah. Only when you touch a mace do you become a avatumah, or if you are a mitzayre or a zav, you become a avatumah. But if you touch a sheretz, you become a rishon l'tumah. So over here, you don't have this unique stringency of a avatumah. Person that touched a sheretz and then he's going to the mikvah, we can learn out from there. Says the Gemara, I still can't learn out from the tful yaim of a sheretz. Why not? Ma le tful yaim the sheretz. By the case of the tful yaim of the sheretz, shekain b'minoi avatumah. Even though right now he is not an avatumah because he only touched the sheretz, but he is an individual that could become an avatumah. A human being or a keli, now he touched the sheretz, so he's not an avatumah. But a human being and a keli, if you touch a mace, you become an avatumah. What are we trying to learn out to? We're trying to learn out to a kikar. A kikar, a piece of bread, never becomes an avatumah. That's the halacha. Piece of bread that touches a mace does not become an avatumah, does not become tameh. Rashi over here brings the sources from the psukim when it talks about a mace that's metame. A mace is only metame adam v'kelim, and an adam v'kelim that touch a mace, they become an avatumah. But when it comes to oichel, oichlin, mashkin, and actually a kli cheres as well, they do not become an avatumah. And the context of the pasuk over there is, what's the halacha if you touch a mace? If you touch a mace, then you have to be toivel in a mikveh. Could you toivel food in a mikveh? You don't toivel food in a mikveh to be metayiret. A kli cheres that becomes tummy. Do you toivel a kli cheres in a mikveh? Also not. Only other kinds of kalim could be toiveled in a mikveh to be metayiret them. A kli cheres and food, you don't toivel in a mikveh. So just like you don't toivel them in the mikveh, they don't become tummy with an avatumah if they touch a mace. So if so, what the Gemara is asking is, you still can't learn out from a tful yaim to a piece of bread. Why not? Because by a tful yaim, even if here we're talking about the tful yaim of a sheretz, but if we're talking about a human being or a keli, the idea, the possibility of a avatumah applies here. Whereas by food, which is what we're talking about, there is no concept of avatumah b'chlal. So therefore, it's more lenient. So I can't apply the stringency of tumah by trumah that I find by a tful yaim to a kikar to say that there should be a shlishi l'tumah for the trumah of this kikar. There's a bigger leniency here. So that the Gemara answers, Kli cheres yichiach. So therefore we'll have to learn out, we'll have to prove this idea from a Kli cheres. A Kli cheres, as I just mentioned, there is no avatumah by a Kli cheres, just like there's no tvila by a Kli cheres, there is also no avatumah by a Kli cheres if it touches a mace. And nevertheless, by a Kli cheres, it's metame chulin, it's metame trumah. So I see that the Kli cheres causes tumah for trumah, even though there is no concept of avatumah by it. So what did you want to say? You wanted to tell me that by tful yaim, the fact that it causes tumah for trumah is why? Because it has the concept of avatumah in it. No, that's not the reason. I see a kli cheres, there's no avatumah by it, and nevertheless it causes tumah for trumah. So therefore, Kli Cheres proves that I could learn out this idea of shlishi l'tumah for a kikar that has nothing to do with avatumah. Says the Gemara, but there's a certain stringency that Kli Cheres has, and I can't learn out from there either. What's that? Ma'ale Kli Cheres, the stringency I find by a Kli Cheres is, shekei metame me'aviroi. By a Kli Cheres, if the sheretz entered into the ear space of the Kli Cheres, automatically it becomes tameh, even if the sheretz did not touch the actual Kli Cheres. Usually, for tumah to be transmitted, it has to touch. By Kli Cheres, there's a unique stringency. It just enters into the ear space and it becomes tummy. So I can't learn out from Kli Cheres to teach me this halacha that a kikar, a bread, becomes a shlishi l'tumah for trumah. Because by Kli Cheres, the fact that it causes tumah for truma is based maybe on a unique stringency that it has. It's different, that over there, its tumah is even if it's just in the airspace of the Kli Cheres. Says the Gemara, so we go back now, Tvul Yaim Yechiach. Let's go back to the other source that we brought, which is Tvul Yaim. Over there, it doesn't have this stringency of the airspace, and it causes tumah for truma. So now here, the Gemara says that we'll say it's Sad Hashava. We use two together as a source, and we use the common denominator. And now this limud that we're trying to learn out reverts back, it bounces back and forth between these two, and what we say is we have over here two sources of where I see that it causes tumah for trumah, and each one has its own stringency, but they don't have the same stringency. Each one has its own, so if they're not the same, so then the point here is, it doesn't make sense to say that the unique stringency that Tvul Yaim has is the cause for the din that it causes tumah for trumah. And it doesn't make sense to say that the unique stringency that Kli Cheres has is the source of this tumah, because they're not the same. Each one cancels out the other to say that that is the reason for its tumah. And rather, what do I say? Hatzad Hashava Shubehen. Look at the common denominator that they have. What's the Tzad Hashava? Okay, so here in our Gemara, the girsa is Shamutarin b'chulin u'paislin b'truma. There's a long Rashi on this, and Rashi changes the girsa. Rashi says that instead of reading Shamutarin b'chulin, you have to read this, that the Tzad Hashava of the two, and that is Tvul Yaim and Kli Cheres, is that they're Tmein, or they're Metamin, that the Torah refers to them both as Tamei. A Tvul Yaim, even though he already tabled in the mikveh, but until sundown, he's referred to as Tamei. And a Kli Cheres also, it's Tamei. And upaislim betrumeh, and both of these are called tummy, and they pasel trumeh, they cause tumeh to trumeh. Kol shekain kikar sheni, most definitely a kikar which is a sheni letumeh, shepaisel b'chulin, that it is and by the kikar sheni it pasels chulin, it becomes pasel by chulin. The kikar which is a sheni becomes pasel, becomes tumeh by chulin. The paisel betrumeh, that for sure it should also cause a shlishi letrumeh by trumeh. That's the Kal V'chaimer. So it's really not a Kal V'chaimer, but it's a Tzad Hashava that we learn out from two together, from the Kli Cheres and the Tvul Yaim. We learn from them out together to this Kikar Sheni, that it causes a Shlishi L'tumeh for Trumeh. Rashi here says that the gears that we have here in our Gemara, Shumutarin B'chulin, it doesn't make sense for the simple reason because by a Kli Cheres, where do you find by a Kli Cheres that it's mutter for Chulin? How could the Gemara say that by a Kli Cheres it's mutter for chulin and it's paisel b'truma? A Kli Cheres, if it causes truma if it causes tumah, that is for truma, it causes tumah for chulin. It goes together. There's no difference by a Kli Cheres between chulin and truma. So how's the Gemara making a distinction between them? That's one question Rashi asks. Rashi asks other questions. Akopanim, Rashi changes the gears of the Gemara. So let's go along with that. Let's continue. So the Gemara now has the limud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. This was his source for shlishi l'tomeh by trumah. Now says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was concerned that a future generation is going to refute this. Now a future generation, he said, is going to refute this and say, you look at these two cases, the Kli Cheres and the Tvul Yaim, even though they have a common denominator, but nevertheless, the question is, they both have a unique stringency that's causing this din, even though it's not the same stringency, but they both have a stringency. And the kikar, that's a sheni l'tomeh, does not have any of those stringencies. So how could I apply this limud and say that it can cause a shlishi l'tomeh? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, tzad chomer le'parach. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai himself held this is not a pircha. This does not refute this limud, because as long as it's not the same stringency, I can learn out from them. That's the concept of tzad hashava. If it's the same stringency, so then I see that's the cause of the din. But if it's a different stringency, so then they cancel each other out. Then we know that that's not the cause of the din, and therefore I could learn them out. That was the pshat in the Mishnah. Now the Gemara takes this a step further. So till here we were discussing regarding trumah, how does a trumah cause shlishi l'tumah? Now, as I mentioned before, when it comes to kachim goes one step up. By kachim, it goes from sheni to shlishi and actually to revi l'tumah. Tanya, so on this we're going to Nabraisa, Rabbi Yosi said, Minayin l'revi b'kodesh apostle. What's the source to say that by kachim there's a revi l'tumah? So it's the Gemara, a similar kavachayme. V'dinu, the kavachayme here is as follows. Ma mechuser kipurim. When it comes to a mechuser kipurim, so mechuser kipurim is similar to a tful yain. What happens by a person that's tamei? In some situations, let's say by a zav, becomes tamei, then he has to go to the mikveh. As soon as he goes to the mikveh, he's mutter to eat chulin. Then he has to wait until sundown in order to eat truma, but he still can't eat kachim. When can he eat kachim? He has to wait till the next day, and then he brings his karbanis. Once he brings his karbanis, then he can eat kachim. So that's what we're talking about over here. Regarding a mechusa kipurim, shemutta betruma. Because it was already sundown, he's already allowed to eat truma. But pasal b'kaidesh, he still can't eat kachim until he brings his karban on the next day. If so, shlishi, when it comes to something which is tamei, a shlishi l'tumah, shepasal betruma, and this shlishi is going to be pasal for truma. As we just learned out before, that when it comes to truma, the transmission of truma goes until the level of a shlishi. So he is more stringent than this mechusa kipurim. He's even asa for truma. So for sure, most definitely we should say that he could transmit truma even further, and he can make the shlishi can cause a revi to become tame by kachim. Now the Gemara explains, "V'lamadno shlishi lakaidesh minatayra." The fact that by kachim he causes tumah to a shlishi l'tumah, for that we don't need any source. That we learn out from a pasuk. Urevi mekavachaymer. Now the fact that by a kachim you could transmit tumah to a fourth level, that's learned out from a kavachaymer. The reason the Gemara is saying this is again similar to the point that I mentioned before, because otherwise you would say dayai. What are we learning out this kavachayme from? We're learning it out the kavachayme from a mechusa kipurim. Over there, you don't find that there's a tumah that goes to the fourth level. If our whole kavachayme is based on the fact that truma is more stringent than the mechusa kipurim, a mechusa kipurim is allowed to eat truma, and by truma you see that there's by the shlishi l'tumah. By the truma, he's not allowed to eat that truma, or there's a halacha of shlishi l'tumah by truma, but you don't have in the kavachaymer any source to say more than shlishi l'tumah. How can we learn out from this kavachaymer to say by kachim that there's a fourth level of tumah? So we should say daya, you can't learn out more than the source. That's what the Gemara adds over here, that for the shlishi l'tumah by a kachim, we don't need a pasuk for that. We don't need a kavachaymer rather for that. That's learned out b'feidish from a pasuk. So we only need the kavachaymer for the fourth level of tumah. So if the kavachayme would be meaningless if you don't apply it to the revi l'tumah, so we don't say daya. So that's what the halach of the kavachayme is coming to teach, that the tumah is transmitted further even to the revi l'tumah. Now the Gemara brings the source for this. Where do I see by kachim that there's a shlishi l'tumah? So minolam, where do I see this? T'chsev, again, shlishi l'kaidesh minatayre minolam. What's the source that by kachim tumah is transmitted until a shlishi l'tumah? Because the pasuk says by kachim, and this is the same pasuk that the Gemara quoted before, v'habasar ashayiga b'chol tamei lo yeyachal, that any basar of a carbon that touches in any tamei, you should not eat this. Now, what kind of a tumah is it talking about? Mi lo yaskinan. Isn't this pasuk talking about the naga b'sheni, that the basar touched something which is a sheni l'tumah? Sheni l'tumah, the Torah speaks about it. Sheni l'tumah, that's the pasuk where it speaks about the oven, the kli cheres, and it has bread inside, and it becomes a sheni l'tumah. And over here, the pasuk is saying the basar of a carbon that touches any tumah, including a sheni l'tumah, it becomes tamei. V'amar achmana lo ye'achal, and the Torah says you can't eat it. So I clearly see in the pasuk the idea of shlishi l'tumah regarding kachim. Revi mikavachaymer. So therefore, the revi of tumah by kachim, for that I need a kavachaymer, and that's what the kavachaymer teaches me, that by kachim the tumah is transmitted all the way to a revi l'tumah. Kidal maran, as we said before. But on this, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan said, Tam biribi eine yedeya. The reasoning, the source, the logic of the great one, which was Rabbi Yasi, that just said this halacha. Rabbi Yasi was the greatest in his generation. I don't understand his source, that he's learning it out from Tful Yom. Why not? Shaharei chuvasai b'tzidai. What was his whole source? He was learning it out from Tful Yom. Right? What was his kavachayim? He was saying that by Tful Yom is allowed to eat truma. And still, mechusa kipurim rather, sorry. Yeah, not Tful Yom. We're talking about a mechusa kipurim. A mechusa kipurim is allowed to eat truma, but he's not allowed to eat kachim. So if so, a shlishi, which is possible for truma, for sure should cause a revi for kachim. That was his source. from the mechusik Kippurim. So on that he says, Shuvasa b'tzidai. The refutation to this Kal V'chaim is right there on its side. What is that? Eichel haba machmas tful yaim. What happens to any food that a tful yaim touches? What's the halacha with this? Yechiach. This should prove shepasel betruma. This food that a tful yaim touches, a tful yaim is not allowed to eat truma, and if a tful yaim touches truma, that food becomes tamei. But ve'ena is revi by kodesh. But nevertheless, there is no halacha of revi by kodesh regarding this food that a tful yaim touches. So right over here, I see that this point is not true. What was the Kal V'chaim? We were trying to say that any time I find food which is tamei for truma, for sure I should apply and say that there's a revi l'tumah for kachim. That's the point that it said before regarding shlishi l'tumah, right? That by shlishi l'tumah I say that if the shlishi l'tumah is tamei for truma, for sure I should say that it's tamei for truma, that it goes to a revi l'tumah. But over here, by this oichel, it becomes tamei from a tful yaim. Over here, I see that the halacha is not so. Over here, I see that the halacha is that it's possible for trumeh, but there's no revi'ah for kodesh. So I see that this idea is not true. And here, the Gemara brings a source for this, and there's actually various opinions about this. There's 3 opinions about a tful yaim that's metameh. This whole sugi here began with the tful yaim, and here it brings you a few different opinions regarding the status of a tful yaim when it touches something. The Tanya, so on Abraisa, we learned a few opinions. So here the Gemara is going to point out that the whole question of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yosi is going to be based on the Chachamim's opinion that's quoted in this Braisa. In this Braisa we'll see there's Abba Shaul, there's Rab Meir, and there's a Chachamim. And the Gemara is asking the question according to the last opinion. So let's see. Abba Shaul says that we're very stringent when it comes with a Tful Yaim. Tful Yaim, Tchilo la Kodesh. When it comes to a Tful Yaim, and he touches Kachim, he's considered to be like a Rishon L'Tomeh. And therefore, L'Tameh Shnayim V'Lifsei Lechad. So therefore, this Tful Yaim, he will make 2 things Tameh, and he'll make something else even still Pasul. Like I said before, Pasul means that it becomes Tameh itself, but it does not transmit any Tumah. So basically what he's saying is, by a Tful Yaim, Chachamim were geyser, that he's a Rishon L'Tomeh, then he can make a Sheni, and then the Sheni makes a Shlishi, and the Shlishi makes a Revi. That's the gzeira by a Tful Yaim. Rab Meir says, no, the gzeira doesn't go so far. Metame echad upaisal echad. We consider a tful yaim to be like a sheni l'tumah, and therefore this sheni l'tumah could be metame something to become food, to become a shlishi l'tumah, and then by kachim that shlishi will be metame one more to become a revi l'tumah. That's the halach of a tful yaim. But now the chachamim maimrim, and this is the opinion that the Gemara focuses on to try to refute Rabbi Yosi's Kal V'chaim. Rabbi Yosi says, Kishem shepaisel eichle terume o mashke terume. By a tful yaim is allowed to eat chulin, but he's not allowed to eat terume. And if he touches terume, he will make the terume pasul, whether it's food, whether it's liquid. So kach, the same applies regarding kachim. Paisel eichle kodesh o mashke kodesh. The tful yaim, if he touches kachim, he will make it tamei, but not any further. In other words, the tful yaim himself is considered to be a sheni, and if he touches food, just like regarding truma, we say that this food becomes tamei, but he can't transmit tamei any further. It's the same thing also with kachim, that he will make the kachim tamei, but he can't transmit any tumah any further. So what do we see over here? Right over here, there's a case regarding the food that was touched by a tful yaim that is only shlishi l'tumah. It doesn't go further than shlishi. It doesn't go to revi. Rabbi Yosi is saying a Kal V'chaim that I learn out from a mechusik Kippurim, and that from there I see that if it's tamei for trumeh, for sure by kachim the tumah should go a step further to revi l'tumah. But right over here by the oichel that becomes tamei from a tful yaim, I see that the rule is not so. This oichel that became tamei from the tful yaim, it becomes tamei for trumeh to be a shlishi l'tumah, and by kachim it's the same. It only becomes tamei to be a shlishi l'tumah, not any further. It doesn't go to become a revi l'tumah. So this refutes Rabbi Yosi's Kal V'chaim. So Maskefla Rav Papa asks on this, why is Rabbi Yochanan refuting this Kal V'chaim based on the Chachamim's opinion? Mimai, the Rabbi Yosi K'Rabbanan Svirele. How do we know that Rabbi Yosi held like the Rabbanan? Dilma Kabashal Svirele. Maybe Rabbi Yosi holds like Abishol, the Omar, and Abishol said that over here when it comes to the food that becomes tummy from a Tful Yaim, L'Tameh Shnayim V'Lifsei Lechad, that there will be a reveal l'tumah, because the Tful Yaim is considered to be a Rishain l'tumah, and then he's Metame up to a reveal l'tumah even by kachim. So I see over here itself that there is a reveal l'tumah by kachim. Rashi points out that if the Gemara wants to refute this question, or the Gemara of Papa that's asking on this question, we could also say that maybe Rabbi Yossi held like Rabbi Meir, not only like Abba Shaul. Even according to Rabbi Meir, I see already this point that there's a revi l'tumah by kachim from the Tvul Yaim. But the Gemara says Abba Shaul. The Gemara goes to the extreme. So the Gemara says, no, we can't say that. Because Isla Kedaitach, if you're going to say that Rabbi Yossi agrees to Abba Shaul, that I find by food that becomes tummy from a Tvul Yaim, that the Chacham was so machmer, that over there by kachim it goes all the way to Revi l'tumah. So if so, Laisi l'Revi b'Kodesh. So if so, we could learn out this halacha that is Revi by Kodesh, may oichel shaba machmas Tvul Yaim. I could learn that out from this halacha itself, right over here, from food that becomes tummy from a Tvul Yaim. I have a kavachayim right over here. I don't have to have the kavachayim that we brought before from the chusik kipurim. You can learn it out right over here. And what is that? Ma oichel haba machmas Tvul Yaim. Food that became tummy from a Tvul Yaim. The Tvul Yaim gufei mutter b'chulin, the source of this tumah, which is the Tvul Yaim himself, he's mutter to eat chulin, to touch chulin, but nevertheless, Amrit, what do you say about this food? Eiser reviv b'kodesh. There the chumrah goes so far that there's a reviv of tumah by kachim. So eichel shlishi haba machmas sheni. If so, when it comes to food which is a shlishi l'tumah, and what's its source of tumah? It comes from a sheni. The sheni gufei asa b'chulin. So this is more stringent because the sheni, which is its source of tumah, is asa b'chulin. Not like the Tvul Yaim himself, which is mutter b'chulin. Over here, it's more stringent that the sheni is asa b'chulin. And it then shayis revi b'kodesh. So for sure, you should say that there's a revi b'kodesh regarding kikar, regarding food. That was the whole thing we're trying to learn out regarding food. If the tumah is transmitted to revi b'kodesh. So this is where he should have learned it out from. The fact that he doesn't learn it out from here means that he doesn't agree to Abba Shaul's opinion. Now, if you'll argue and say that the reason why Rabbi Yossi did not learn out from here is mishum de'ikil mifrach, because there is a refutation to this limud, and this is the refutation that we already brought in the beginning of this inyan, that ma'al tvul yaim shekein avatumah. I can't learn out this kind of kavachayme that there's reviv betumah by kachim from tvul yaim, or even from the food that comes from tvul yaim, because tvul yaim has a unique stringency. There's a concept of avatumah by tvul yaim, and you don't find that by the food. By food, there's no avatumah. That you can't say because I see name in Mechusik Purim. Rabbi Yossi learns out his Kavachaymer is not from here, but his Kavachaymer was from where? From Mechusik Purim. And over there, V'loi Parche, there he doesn't ask this refutation that is Avatumah. By Mechusik Purim as well, there's a concept of Avatumah. The Mitzayre, the Zav, that has to bring a carbon, what is he? He's the Avatumah. And over there, we didn't ask that question, so he considers that to be a good Kavachaymer. So why didn't he learn out from here? Must be he does not hold like Abba Shaul. If he does not hold like Abba Shaul or Rab Meir, he holds like the Chachamim. So then the question is, how could he even bring the limud from Mechusik Purim? According to the Chachamim, right over here by Oichel that becomes Tomei from a Tvul Yaim, I see that Trumah and Kachim are the same. That they both only become a Shlishi L'Tomeh, not any further from that. So therefore this refutes the Kavachaymer that he wanted to learn out from Mechusik Purim that tells us that there is Revi L'Tomeh for Kachim. That's the question, and the Gemara does not answer this.